When we say we are one Caribbean, it's so true. And it's not just we gathered one day and decided we're going to be one Caribbean because we're in the same vicinity. It's a true line that connects us all. And it shows up in our beliefs in religion. It shows up in our stories. It shows up in our history.
This is the Moreish Podcast, where Caribbean history meets culture and cuisine. Hi, Kesha. We're back for another folklore episode of the Moreish Podcast.
Hey, Hema. I'm so glad to be here.
This is going to be our last folklore episode for season 2. But before we dive into today's story, I want to take a quick second and talk about some of the things that you've been doing, because I see you all over social media talking about these great events and storytelling events that you're doing around the Toronto area. So tell me about those.
Wow. What isn't happening? So my passion is storytelling, not just from my perspective, but also partnering or collaborating with other storytellers within the GTA, or those that I can get hands on. And so I have a project that I'm working on with Caribbean Talawa, and it's called the Caribbean Story Tree. And so we're getting groups together of multiple generations just to gather and tell their personal stories. So we start with folk tales, get everyone comfortable, and everybody start vibing. And then, the stories come out about cooking, aunties, all kinds of things. And we just create a safe space to have those conversations and share those stories. I'm also all over social media talking about the power of storytelling and helping others to amplify their voice through telling their story. You might be holding on to it really, really tight, but someone needs to hear it, and how to put that together, as well as celebrating us through our stories, collaborating with groups through Emancipation Day and Caribbean Heritage Month and different things. So I will be on the road sharing stories far and wide. I also have a few kids workshops coming up and some adult workshops as well, where we're just creating a safe space to be comfortable with our voice and share our stories, and really amplifying Caribbean storytelling, because those stories seem to be the hardest to find. I love hearing African stories, but I find that our Caribbean stories, you got to dig a little bit. So I want to make it easier to share and find those stories.
Where can people find out about all of these events if they want to attend something live, or if they just want to see what you're doing?
Absolutely. The best way is to follow me on Instagram at talkin, TALKIN _tales, TALES. You can also find me on TikTok as well, under the same.
I imagine some of these kids' events are going to be really great for people as they go into summer holidays.
Yes, bring them.
So let's dive into our story, or our folktale for today.
Yes. So today we are traveling to the Dominican Republic. Now, I think I've saved the D's for last, but the Dominican Republic has such flavor. I mean, you have the indigenous peoples, the Taino people, you have the African influence, as well as the Spanish influences. And stories are a communal activity. They're told when people get together. They're told spiritual gatherings as well. They're just stories. But what I love about these stories is that they're a little dark. And so I've got one for you that I think you might really like.
All right.
So if anyone has asked you, you're cheating death. Have you ever cheated death? Let me tell you, there is one man who did. Long before now, there was a young man named Joe. Now, Joe was handsome, built, strong, but he had one little thing about him. He didn't like to work. He liked to get things done. He liked to spend the money, but he didn't like the work. And people started to buzz around. Why Joe lazy? Joe's so lazy. And they wondered, what was he going to do, because he was ashamed to his family. There was one person that was watching Joe, liked the way that he would get himself in and out of trouble. He felt almost like a Nancy. And that was death. So one day, Death pulled Joe aside and said, I can make you rich. I can make you so rich you wouldn't believe. What do I have to do? Not much. Rich, not much work. Joe was in. So the agreement was this: Death would make Joe a doctor. And anybody that comes through Joe's door, Death will heal. But if Joe were to ever see Death at the head of the bed instead of the foot of the bed, then that meant that Joe could not heal that person. That one was for Death, and Joe would have to walk away. Well, Joe set up his office, and word spread widely that Joe could heal anybody. People came from far and wide. The lineups were so long, but all he did was tap, 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 and each person was healed. Word spread all the way through the village and further, further away until it touched the castle where the king lived. Now, the king had everything that he wanted, except for one thing: his daughter. She was beautiful. She was smart, but she was so sick. And he had sent to all kinds of countries for every ointment, herb, or potion, and none of it worked to heal her. And she was getting worse and worse by the day. So he heard about Joe and called his helpers. Go and bring me the doctor. They went, they got Joe. And Joe walked all the way. They were walking to the castle, and he's looking at all the things. And he was wondering why the king wants to see him. He was nervous, but he went. And as he presented in front of the king said, I have a patient for you, and I need you to heal my daughter. But know this: you come here today, you heal my daughter, the two of you will marry, and all of this will be yours. But if you don't, you will die. Well, Joe knew his plan, right? He had to deal with death, and he knew what was happening. Show me your daughter. So the king brought him to the daughter's room, opened the door. The king and Joe stepped in. The king stepped in and looked at his daughter's bed. Joe came in and looked the same way. There was just one problem. When Joe came in and looked, he saw Death at the head of the bed. The king left and closed the door. But Joe was thinking to himself, in all the time that he has been dealing with Death, Death has always been at the foot of the bed. But now he's at the head. And if the daughter dies, then... And Joe wasn't ready to die. He had a few things he wanted to do, and he was still a good-looking chap, So he thought for a moment. He knew he had to move fast, and he had to think quick. So he walked to the edge of the bed, put his hand on the pole at the foot of the bed, and spun that bed as hard as he could. He spun it around so that Death was at the foot of the bed and he was at the head. And just like that, the princess was healed. He grabbed her hand, ran out of the room, presented her before the king. The king was so overjoyed. His daughter was healed. Oh, he sent his people to make arrangements to set up for the wedding the very next day. Joe was happy. Whew, that was a close one. But Joe had to go home and come back the next day for the wedding. So he waited some time and he started to make his way home. And as he headed home, he met someone on the path, someone that he knew very well. Death looked at him and said, that was clever. But since she did not die, you must die. Come with me. And so Death led him off the path and to a place where there seemed to be a red carpet down the middle, and on each side there were these little oil lamps everywhere, all of them lit. Death turned to face Joe, pulled out this lamp, and this lamp was very weak, very weak. This is your lamp. It has enough life for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Joe's not going to be rich. He's not going to have the princess. He had to think fast. Well, I have a story to tell you, he said to Death. But this story is at least 10 minutes long. Death stood and thought about it, and the story could be nice. So he opened his cloak and reached inside, took out a ladle with some oil, opened the lamp, and poured in about 10 minutes worth of life. Closed it, put the ladle back, closed his cloak, and waited for the story. Joe started to tell his story, very low and slow, kind of like that story that never has an ending. And Death is hardworking. All of the people that Death has to look over, some to heal, some to take, he walks back and forth tired. So as the story went on and on, Death started to get a little tired, but he wanted to hear the end of the story. So he sat down. He listened to the story, but his eyes were getting heavy. But he wanted to hear the end, so he leaned in, put his hand to his face, and he listened to the story that seemed to be going on and on until Death fell asleep. Joe looked around. He opened the cloak. He took out the ladle. He opened his lamp and he filled it right up, till it was almost overflowing. He put back the ladle. He closed the cloak. He closed the lamp. He took a deep breath and ran away. Did he ever marry the princess? He sure did. Where does he live now? They don't live in the castle. They have a lovely little home on the other side of the island. And I tell you, this is a long story to tell. But you know who told me? It was Joe himself. He put enough oil in that lamp to live forever.
This story has so many elements of things that people look for. He's too lazy to work and he wants something pretty quick. Being able to heal somebody, people who want to believe that they just go to any healer and line up and believe wholeheartedly. It feels like a classic tale, but it's very much a Caribbean tale.
Yes.
And Dominican Republic is where this one is from. It feels like it could be told almost anywhere.
It can be, yes. Mm-hmm. So the way that you could change the story is give it a different island, maybe a different setting, a different name of the person, or, just a different flavors. There's so many ways that I would take this story and change it for the audience that I'm telling it to. But I just wanted to keep it as, here's where it's from, this is the story, and when you hear it again, you might not recognize it.
You started off by saying it's a bit of a dark story, and it is, but then it isn't, because, he gets the girl in the end. He lives forever, however you feel about living forever.
Yeah. But you see, if it was, say it was Halloween, because the people in this country that I live in love Halloween, even though as Caribbean people, we know things go bump in the night every night of the year. I would change that story. I would make Death darker, and then I probably wouldn't make it so easy, and leave some reference or some curiosity as to whether Death was really sleeping, or if Death came back to remind him of their deal. I changed it up a little bit to make it a little darker, just to follow the theme.
And depending on the age of the people that you're telling this to, you probably don't want to make it darker if it's a bunch of 5 and 6-year-olds. What are the origins of the story?
So the origins of the story is very religious based, because the Dominican Republic is a very religious island. And so given that there's such a strong belief in the way that they worship and the way that they teach their children and carry on that religion. So it has that religious aspect. And I could change the story and make it more religious based. And so it's just one of those stories that can be carried. And it just carries the belief in life and death, the belief that there's an angel for loosely that takes you to the next place where you're going to be, takes you to heaven, takes you to whatever your next is, depending on what you believe. So there's that aspect to it that really gives the story its. But then you have to realize that because of the mix of people on the island, the story has to kind of represent everyone. So I feel like this version of the story makes it inclusive for all.
The Dominican Republic is one half of the island of Hispaniola. Haiti's on the other half. They have the island as a whole, and then each country has such a diverse, rich, storied background.
Yes. Well, now you've already mentioned that half the island is Haiti and the other half is Dominican Republic. Now, Haiti is French, Dominican Republic, Spanish. So those undertones are deeply rooted.
And I would think, I could be wrong about this, but I would think that in the Dominican Republic, it feels like the Spanish influence is very prevalent, whereas in Haiti, there's French, but also very strong African influence.
Yes, definitely more prominent in Haiti, and the religion is very, very different. And it's just, I guess it adds to the beauty and the uniqueness of the people, of who we are, and why we are all so closely intertwined, because there's those deep roots, and it's not like a straight line. It's this roller coaster or wave of traditions, experiences, and influences that touch all of us as Caribbean people.
I really have been enjoying these folklore folk tales that you've been telling. And being that this is the last one for season 2 of the podcast, is there anything you want to share about Caribbean folklore in general?
Caribbean folklore in general, what I find the most interesting is that we have similar beliefs across the Caribbean. For example, there are characters that live on every island in different capacities. I like to think of the Sukunya. I like to think of La Jablesse, and even Rolling Calf. There is a version of this creature that comes for you. Everything goes bump in the night. They're lessons they're stories that give a little more insight in our history and um, our influences. So every island has a little bit of a different influence on the story, and you can tell by the language that the story is written in or told in. But they're all like, I could tell that same story in Trinidad that I could tell, in St. Kitts, and I don't have to rephrase it. When I think of rolling calf, I think of, in Jamaica, there's rolling calf. In St. Kitts, there's rounce. Essentially the same type of creature, the same type of character, and the lesson in the story is the same. So as much as we are different, when we say we are one Caribbean, it's so true. And it's not just we gathered one day and decided we're going to be one Caribbean because we're in the same vicinity. It's a true line that connects us all. And it shows up in our beliefs in religion. It shows up in our stories. It shows up in our history. We may have had colonizers at different times, but the experiences is the same, and it shows up in all our stories, whether it's a trickster tale or whether we're talking about the things that we believe and the things that we fear. They're the same.
Much like the history that I've been talking about on this podcast, and through the food, you can see the historical influences. Through these folk tales, you can also see the historical influences based on not only the origins of the tales, but how it's been adapted for our Caribbean culture.
Absolutely. And I say in my podcast, every story that I tell comes from a different island. But yes, it does sound Jamaicafied, if that's a word, because I'm Jamaican. So it will always sound that way. But when you hear the story, we all have that common. Even though it's a Jamaican teller, you're hearing a Trinidadian story, you're hearing a Haitian story, you're still hearing it. And in your mind, you're probably playing the Creole. You're adding your own little zhuzh, your little spice to make it your own. But it's the ability to plate it and present it that says, yes, I remember that. And that's what I'd like to do.
Yeah, in our discussions, we talk about the origins of the stories, but in reality, for most people, it is just a folktale. It's just a Caribbean folktale, a Trinidadian folktale, a Guyanese folktale, a Jamaican folktale. They're not thinking about the origins, but the way they're hearing it, and if they're the kind of person that sees images in their mind as they're hearing a story, everybody's images are going to be slightly different depending on their lived experience.
Absolutely. When we go to an art gallery and we look at that magnificent painting, somebody's seeing a unicorn, someone else is seeing a mother and child, someone's seeing a tree. But it doesn't matter because we're all embracing the beauty of this piece.
Yeah. You talked about your podcast. Tell us again what the name of your podcast is.
So my podcast is called Walk Good, African and Caribbean Folktales and Other Stories. And new episodes are on Tuesdays on a bi-weekly schedule. Last week's episode was about the Moonlight Carnival in Antigua. It's their last lap for Carnival. Every island has a carnival. Every island has a last lap. But did you know that Antigua's last lap was done at midnight? So I add a little bit of that, dive into the Antiguan folktale. So whichever piece you're interested in latching on to, whether it's let me find out more about that Moonlight Carnival, or let's dive a little bit deeper into this Anansi story. Now that if you see it, it's been presented, you can ask those questions.
We are taking a little bit of a break. I am taking a bit of a break from the podcast to talk to some new people. But in the meantime, I'm going to link down below your podcast, the previous episodes that we've done. And I'm also going to link the episodes that we've done on the history of Haiti and the history of the Dominican Republic. So there's lots for you to listen to while we take a little bit of a break. And I want to say thank you so much for joining me for this season of the Moreish Podcast. And I look forward to connecting with you for season 3.
Oh, gosh. See you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Moreish Podcast. Connect with us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the Moreish Podcast. See you for the next episode.